Hey nerds, Farmer Jesse here. Welcome to Growers Daily. It is Friday, October 4th, and today we're going to talk about turning compost efficiently. We're going to dig into some comments from listeners this week, and I'm going to talk about what I do to unwind. So let's do it. Okay, so it has been a solid first week of Growers Daily. Obviously, I am still getting the hang of this new content format, but it's been a challenging new experience, and I'm able to touch on a wide range of topics, and hopefully that has been as fun for you as it has been for me. I'm feeling great about it. Soon we will start having some special guest hosts, probably by next week, but I'm taking my time with that while I get the hang of this whole daily podcasting thing. Today, I thought I would get some listener feedback from the entire week on a variety of topics that I discussed, and maybe make that a Friday tradition, or maybe not. Who knows? Friday feedback. If it alliterates, it obliterates. I don't know. That one doesn't really. I need to work on that one. The first notable listener feedback of many, so thank you for those. Anyway, this one comes from Zach Williams 805 on YouTube about Wednesday's episode, in which I talk about the rough summer alcohol is having in the news. Zach writes, I'm a small-scale market farmer and former beer brewer of 10 years. Before leaving the brew house, we saw an increase in grain price and simultaneously grain that gave us less sugars for fermentation. Generally, this is thought to be due to heat and drought in major barley growing regions like Montana. Zach writes, what I had heard was many barley farmers were looking at more winter hardy types of barley to help reduce the need for water and boost the amount of available barley in the summer. Lastly, I think alcohol consumption has to do with a generational change as well. I know my brewery was well aware that Gen Z is seemingly much less likely to drink alcohol. It is thought this is due to social media and seeing people online acting foolish while drunk. Off my soapbox. Thanks for all you do. Love the new podcast. Thanks, Zach. And interesting perspective on Gen Z. Digging around a bit more, I found this in a Forbes magazine article titled Heavy Drinking Young Adults Are Cutting Back, study suggests. Here's how the alcohol industry is still cashing in, by Ariana Johnson. That says, quote, almost 30% of college students in 2018 reported abstaining from alcohol compared to 20% in 2002, according to a 2020 JAMA Network Open study. Some 62% of adults under the age of 35 say they drink, according to an August 2023 Gallup poll, down from 72% 2 decades ago. Now, a 10% drop in 20 years feels pretty significant, and there is some evidence that younger generations generally have been drinking less than the generation before them. Like millennials are drinking less than Gen Xers are drinking less than boomers, etc. But generations are not monoliths, so it's hard to extract a great perspective that way. We do know alcohol consumption is trending downward overall, though, which is a big deal. I'd be curious to know more about the barley stuff too. So that's why I kind of left that part in there, because the climate and seed choices have fascinating effects downstream. Anyway, I thought that was fascinating. Okay, I had mentioned earlier this week that a commenter had wanted me to put sections in the video so that they could skip to the relevant stuff, and I implored listeners to consider that any information, especially as it pertains to disasters, could one day be relevant. This one from @Danny's Farm on YouTube is in response to my comments. They write, greetings from southwestern Ukraine. Thanks for making this daily. I download the next morning and start my day. The comment you received about relevance struck a chord with me. Being a small-scale farm in a war, it is easy to connect with flood victims. That, plus I am originally from the South, roll tide. I have friends and family recovering from the hurricane, including friends in Asheville. When people are in trouble or suffering, we should be able to relate. Peace. Here, Danny's Farm, and much love to our farming community in Ukraine. I can only imagine the challenges you all are facing. Unrelated, I like that Danny's Farm wrote roll tide in there. For the uninitiated, that's a reference to the University of Alabama sports. Here in the South, collegiate sports are a significant enough part of our culture that when someone says something like roll tide, you know something significant about that person. So, go Cats. Also, speaking of disaster preparedness, I got this message from Pat Davis on Patreon that says we are members of a volunteer group that works for the local sheriff office in Marion County, Florida. We use ham radios to keep law enforcement and emergency personnel in touch when all other communications fail. We have a group who mans the hospitals, hurricane shelters, EOC, etc. Having a radio to stay in touch is reassuring in difficult times like this. I think farmers should have a ham radio to call for help and keep informed. It works off battery and antenna. Then Pat recommends a person I should interview. And if it works out, I may do that. I know nothing about ham radios, but it does sound like a nice tool to have around just in case. Huge shout out to Pat for that and for their support at patreon.com/no-till-growers. On Monday, I wrote about how certifying your farm organically in the very first year works, like how that's possible. And B Noble on YouTube wrote, has anyone from the state ever attempted to verify your claim of organic farming certification? If so, what did the state representative do to prove authentication of the soil and practice? Other than verbally, does the state take soil/veg samples or food tests post-production? And the answer is that, to the best of my knowledge, they have not tried to verify the two farms that I moved on to, and I'm honestly not sure how they would do that or what it would look like exactly. They do take samples from our farm every other year or so in the form of garlic, usually because I guess that crop is easier to test or something, or maybe it's just storage crops in general are easier to test. Then they will have it tested for chemicals and send it back to us. If the sampled produce contains a certain level of some prohibited substance, they would presumably suspend my certification or something. Though if there are any certifiers out there who want to fill in some of those details of like how that works on the back end, feel free to hit me up. Another listener comment is from Carolyn Finja79, who writes, I quit podcasts for the summer. I love them. I learned so much, I think, but they also contribute to my freeze response at times. I'm in the middle of a catastrophe, as usual, and then I get inundated with how someone's doing it flawlessly. This show is what I needed, a finger on the pulse of the day. My heart is breaking for the farmers and anyone enduring the fallout of Helene. And though it might be an unexpected way to intro a new show, I think you've handled it with grace and tapped directly into a vein that we all can relate to / fear the time we will relate to it. Best of luck. Thank you. The first part of that comment makes me think of that quote, comparison is the thief of joy. That effectively, seeing what someone else is doing doesn't always inspire us. Sometimes it has the opposite effect, taking away from what we are doing or like what we're proud of. I assure you, my farm has weeds. We get pest damage. We have lots of failures. Know that every farm does, and you're doing great. I want this show to show the good, bad, and ugly of this business because it is almost always all three, often all at once. We live in a very curated world in terms of our social media. Let's uncurate it a little bit, which I don't think is a word, but the beauty of English is that you can wordify anything, including the word wordify. Anyway, let's uncurate or decurate a little bit with this show, hence Messy Mondays. Yesterday, I wrote about slowly layering in knowledge to train employees, similar to how a soccer coach would do it to teach the game of soccer. And the last listener comment that I wanted to point out came yesterday, and it's from Robert Catrell 9810 on YouTube, who wrote in response to that, I'm a teacher, context is everything, and scaffolding knowledge, adding details, skills bit by bit is a primary teaching / learning concept. So great points. I actually hadn't thought about the challenge this idea must be for teachers who often have to teach information and not hands-on skills. A hands-on skill is a very different beast because the context is right there for both a sport or a farmer, or for that matter, a chef or a plumber or whatever. Like, not only can you talk about it, but actually do it in the moment. Say like history class, you can't just be like, okay, kids, today we're going to learn about the history of the Roman Empire. So I thought it would be helpful for us to go take over all the other schools in the town, and then we can talk about the expansion and establishment of the Roman Empire. All right, single file, don't forget your armor, and we'll discuss Octavian during the first siege. The context, in other words, is perhaps harder to establish in teaching, but I'm sure there are strategies that would be fun to hear about. All right, keep the comments and questions coming. I love getting the feedback. It's very helpful to me. Speaking of questions, we have a Patreon question on compost turning for the next segment. BRB. Today's episode is brought to you by Rimmel Greenhouses.
Whether it's tomatoes to market, flowers in the spring, or your family's harvest, growing in a greenhouse protected from the weather provides the right environment that you need for a harvest that you can count on. Rimmel Greenhouses are designed for durability and offer the quality that you need to grow productively year-round. Visit rimmelgreenhouses.com to get a quote today.
If I may editorialize for a second, I own a Rimmel tunnel. I love it. We built it ourselves, and I really appreciated the quality of the tunnel as well as the customer service we received in the process. So make sure to check them out. As always, Patreon members get first dibs on the questions of the day. If you want to support our work, not only can you ask questions like the one I am about to get to today, but you can also help guide our work by being a Patreon member. Oh, and I'm shouting out every new Patreon member who signs up that day at the end of the episode for the entire month of October, and every member who bumps up from one tier to another, as a very small thank you to a very big thing. All right, today's question comes from Kimberly Monaco. It is asking about how to turn a compost pile quickly. For example, she says, I know that if you turn the pile daily, it produces faster than being turned weekly. Additionally, this pile would be smaller, such as 3 feet by 3 feet, because I want to use it as soon as possible. Thanks, Kimberly. Great question. Okay, so there are a few things to tackle here in this, like how to increase decomposition of compost pile quickly, how to physically turn a pile more often without killing yourself or your back, emphasis mine. The one sort of unasked question would be, is quick compost worth it? So let's start with that first one of speeding up the decomposition. When the pile first heats up, or to help it heat up, turning it can increase the decomposition and really kickstart that composting process. This is because turning injects oxygen in there, and oxygen-loving organisms go bonkers eating, well, whatever you put in there. This, for a little digression, also happens in tillage, where oxygen is whipped into the soil through the tiller, and oxygen-loving bacteria begin to rapidly consume the soil organic matter and release it as CO2, carbon dioxide. A similar thing happens in a compost pile, but that's a requisite part of the process. Air is essential to compost production, and you need some of those larger particles to break down into a more stable but rich form of organic matter. So yes, turning it more is how you will speed up the process, and it will result in more rapidly decomposed material as long as you are also maintaining good moisture in the pile, because the pile will also dry out faster the more you turn it, and microbes need moisture to do their thing. Once the thermophilic stage, the hot stage, is over, then you don't want to turn it as much. The curing stage is where you really start to develop the microbial diversity and nutritional bounty in compost, which we will get back to in a moment. First, physically, how could you turn a pile more? Well, the answer to that is going to be a little personal for every person, based on just your ability to move a giant pile of heavy material, and the time you have, and honestly, what the materials are. You mentioned a rather small pile at 3 feet by 3 feet, which could be turned by hand, and by hand, I mean like a pitchfork or something, as a good morning exercise. I like small piles because they enable you to use nitrogen sources quickly when they pop up. And like for me, nitrogen sources being something I've had a lot of trouble consistently locating here where I am. So for instance, you mow the grass and you have fresh cut grass clippings, which can be high nitrogen. It's nice to just go ahead and get those composting with some food scraps and other materials, but it may not make a super large pile. With a bunch of materials to reduce the labor, you could also set up a static aerated compost system. I've done a video about this. The static aerated compost system basically just uses like pipes and a bouncy house blower to blow oxygen into your pile. And that helps to control the temperature and inject the oxygen, and also just kind of get the pile going or slow it down. I will say the nice thing about turning a pile is the even decomposition of the entire pile. Static piles are not very consistent, and so the disease and weed seed management will likewise be somewhat inconsistent. Now, back to the question of quality. No two compost piles are the same. It varies a lot based on what you use to make the compost pile. But some things that generally happen when a compost pile is allowed to age after the thermophilic, again, the hot stage, is that the total nitrogen in the pile doesn't change, but the form that nitrogen is in changes to a more plant-available ammoniacal form, which is a great word, ammoniacal. Just essentially meaning the nitrogen compounds derived from ammonia, primarily ammonium, NH4+, and to a lesser extent, ammonia, NH3 gas. These are the forms that plants can more readily utilize of nitrogen. Also, the pH level goes down quite a bit, according to the studies. When the compost is allowed to mature, and other nutrients beyond nitrogen may also become more plant available as well. All that to say, yes, you can rapidly speed up the creation of compost, but it's really time that allows the compost to mature into something beautiful and something really helpful for your garden. It's sort of like a soup. I don't know if that's the right analogy, but it's like a soup. Like, sure, you can make a soup really fast, but it's after the soup sits for a night or two or whatever, right? That's when it really finds its genius. Totally unrelated, but sort of related. I used to order pad thai from a Thai place in the Lower East Side when I worked in New York City. There years and years ago. but I wouldn't eat it right when I ordered it. I would just put that in the fridge and then eat it the next day for lunch because it was that much better by just having kind of married together overnight. Anyway, I hope that's helpful. My compost nerd friends can feel free to jump in here into the comments and flesh that out a bit more if you'd like. We're going to take a quick break, and when we return, how I turn off the farming in my brain. Be right back. Hey you all, the No-Till Growers crew and I want to use the ad space today to point you towards a couple resources to help farmers in North Carolina directly affected by Hurricane Helene. Both the Organic Growers School, or OGS, and the Carolina Farm Stewardship Association, called CFSA, are local ag organizations and have done a lot of work gathering resources for those of us who want to chip in. So their resources will be linked in the show notes, as well as the Appalachian Sustainable Agriculture Project, or ASAP, which was the organization mentioned by Lyric on Tuesday when I spoke with her about her farm's experience with the hurricane there in North Carolina. It is impossible to overstate how big of a disaster this is. Sincerely, one of the worst American disasters since Katrina. So please help if you can, even if just throwing a few bucks towards a farmer's GoFundMe. That would be huge. Thanks, and back to the show. All right, listen, as evidenced by yesterday's episode, one thing that is going to come up time and again on this show is sports, and more specifically soccer. This is for a few reasons. One, as I talked about yesterday, I coach soccer and have my United States Soccer Federation D coaching license, and I find that there are a striking number of parallels between soccer coaching and running a farm that I believe will prove to be helpful, insightful, or at least fun for me to analogize. Two, soccer, unlike basically every other sport, is year-round. There is always soccer on, every week, somewhere in the world, in one form or another. So there are no shortage of storylines to mention that may be relevant in some way to farming, at least at a squint. And three, I think many personality types, or at least those that are steeped as heavily in farming as I am, where I spend at least 10 hours a day either farming or talking about farming, and need an escape. And for me, soccer is that escape. This sport, both watching and coaching it, is a big part of my anti-burnout strategy, because while I am doing one of those two things, I can completely turn off Farmer Jesse. I also think soccer is uniquely fitted for this job of turning off your brain to anything else. For starters, in my opinion, it's the best sport for this because it's the most active, but it's also just the best sport to watch objectively. Let me explain. Soccer is a 45-minute first half, then a 15-minute halftime, followed by a 45-minute second half, plus some stoppage time. Basically, a game is almost always around 2 hours long, give or take a few minutes, but rarely does it ask for more of your life than that, unless it's a tournament game. There are also no commercial breaks, save for halftime. By contrast, American football, that's the one where they don't really use their feet very much. Anyway, American football is 18 minutes of total action and 20 commercial breaks. That's real. There are literally 18 minutes of actual gameplay and 45 minutes of commercials in a professional American football game. And the game itself lasts 3.25 hours on average. Plus, if you made every touchdown and extra kick 1 point instead of 7, the scores would basically be the same as a soccer game. So the argument that soccer is low scoring doesn't really hold up, at least not compared to American football, especially when the points per minute are taken into account. Other beloved American sports don't fare all that much better. Soccer is not only incredibly efficient time-wise, it's also incredibly nerdy. Obviously, any sport can be nerdified quite a bit. Baseball is arguably the nerdiest of all sports, if I'm being fair, but the balance between soccer tactics coming from the coaching staff and the fact that the majority of the decision-making is in the hands of the players, who are often too far away from their coaches to hear them, makes it wildly interesting to me. It also makes it a bit like farming, where you and your crew are not necessarily anywhere near each other, and their own decision-making plus your training have to be relied upon. There's a reason they call soccer the beautiful game as well. It's incredibly elegant to watch. I mean, seriously, just watch a handful of Messi highlights and you'll understand. So because I do occasionally want to analogize soccer to farming, and because sports have played an oversized role in my life that, for reasons I will explain later on, I'm going to try to encourage those of you who love sports, need a way to turn off your brain, but do not already love soccer, to start getting into it a bit by bit, giving you the occasional team to follow. This week, that team is racing Louisville from the National Women's Soccer League, or NWSL, who I hear is the official NWSL team of No-Till Market Gardeners. I don't know who said that. It's just a rumor I heard, but it definitely sounds accurate. Anyway, being only 45 minutes away, this team is literally and figuratively close to my heart, but they have finished 9th in the league, also known as one spot outside of the playoffs, every year since their inception, and they have just a few weeks to try and get over that line. So I'm calling on my market gardening family to throw your support behind Racing Louisville this week and help them get over that playoff line. My family and I are greatly value their existence. Not only is their stadium a fun place for the kiddos to go and play, but studies show that live sports and sports fandom have beneficial social and mental effects on people and offer a release of the week's stresses. And I don't know about you, but farming comes with no shortage of stressors. So anecdotally, I can confirm soccer rules for stress relief. Could soccer be more ecologically, environmentally sustainable? Absolutely. But so too could farming, almost across the board. Also, that's why soccer needs us, because of all the sports, it's the one that at least pretends to care about these things. So anyway, go soccer and tune into Racing Louisville or whoever your local soccer team is, but preferably Racing Louisville, and get on the level. Plus, soccer clubs and stadiums could be a good outlet for local mocktails. Just saying. I will also be coaching 3 soccer games this weekend, so wish me and my kiddos luck on games this weekend, and wish Racing Louisville luck as well. They are playing the KC Current, who are one of the best teams in the league. Oh wait, forgot I had a hat. They are playing the KC Current, who are one of the best teams in the league and a likely title contender, but Racing desperately needs this win to stay in the playoff race, so we need all the help we can get. Hannah and I will be there in person with the kiddos. It's Star Wars night, so I mean, who's going to miss that? So we'll root them on so long as the weather holds. Probably even if the weather doesn't. So watch for me on TV, and by TV I mean NWSL Plus at 7:30 p.m. Eastern, and let's go racing and taking a break from farming. Anyway, this will not be the last time soccer enters the chat, but that's it for Growers Daily today and for the week. I will be back here on Monday for Messy Monday. If you want to support and grow this little seed of a show, join us over at patreon.com/no-till-growers. I will shout out every new Patreon member who signs up in the month of October and who bumps up from one level to another. A couple other ways to support this show is to simply share it with friends. That's always amazing to see. You can snag a copy of the Living Soil Handbook over at no-tillgrowers.com, or a hat, or Dan Brisebois' new book, The Seed Farmer. That one is on pre-order now. It comes out in November. Huge shout out to Willie Breeding for the theme music and the rest of the team there at No Till Growers. Any ideas or listener feedback, let me know. The ideal way to do that is through Patreon, but also if you're watching this on YouTube, you can hit up the comment section. I will occasionally pick out comments that I think are helpful or at least interesting. There's also the forum at no-tillgrowers.com. Still sending our love to those affected by Hurricane Helene. Please keep them in your thoughts this weekend and check out some of the resources in our show notes for ways to chip in and help. Next week, I'm going to be looking for the best farming advice you ever received. Think about that this weekend. Hit me up. It can be technical, philosophical, whatever. I will post a thing on Instagram stories as well today, so you can respond to that or respond in YouTube comments or wherever. Otherwise, I will see you all back here Monday afternoon, and we'll close out with Patreon shoutouts, followed by something I'm going to call Friday Field Notes, where I record some audio from the field. I do it often anyway, just when it pops into my brain. And I'm going to share one of those with you. But first, huge shoutouts this week to, let's see who we got. Ron Middleton, Jen Arnbrister. Arnbrister, that's the kind of name that makes the country come out of your voice. Like, I don't normally have much of a country accent, having grown up in Kentucky, but if I say Arnbrister, it's unavoidable. Great name. Wonderful Tiny Farm and Jim Smith. Thank you all. Thanks you all for the support. We're getting new members every day, and it's so amazing. Thank you. Have a great weekend. We'll see you Monday. Vamos Morados. Bye.
I think sometimes one of the most important lessons that I've ever learned is to just be flat out honest with yourself about what you actually have. Because, like, for instance, last week I kind of oversold lettuce, and the gut wrenching feeling, or like the just like gut turning feeling of having to, email a chef and say, oh, psych, I didn't actually have as much as I thought I did. It's just awful. It doesn't feel good, and you feel like you're not doing a good job. And I've been at this for a long time, and I should be able to forecast pretty well. But some weeks, like, stuff just doesn't size up the way I think it's going to, or something else goes wrong, or I just completely overestimate, or I don't go out and look at it, or whatever happens. And I just realized, like, you have to be honest with yourself. You have to not be overly optimistic about what you have, and you have to look at it before you send out your fresh sheets. So, Jesse, if you're listening, those would probably all be good ideas. You're welcome.